Now, since 2008 until this point in time, over the last 8 years, we have seen the economy go through this gigantic stimulus that the central banks have been pushing on us. And what has happened, it has confused the majority of the population. The majority of the population has been sucked in, and they do believe that this prosperity that we're seeing, I mean, it's only for a few, because many are in the stock market looking at this saying, well, look how great that's doing. Many of these people believe that this is going to continue, and if it doesn't continue, the drop in the stock market will just be temporary and everything will go back to normal. Now, this was the plan of the central bankers all along. And I know I keep repeating this, but the central bankers, the Fed, the ECB, the Bank of Japan, the IMF, the BIS, remember, these organizations, they are not a part of the country or any of these countries. They are a separate entity, and their allegiance is to themselves. They will only do what's best for them, while making you believe it is good for you. So many people believe that this illusion that we're in is going to continue and it's going to never end. And what is happening is people are not really looking outside of the bubble of what is happening here. There are a few, I mean, you guys that are listening to me understand what's going on. They're not looking at the bigger picture of what's being done overseas with many other countries, and they don't realize that all these pieces are in motion. It's almost like back in the 1970s when we were coming off the gold standard with Nixon. He said, oh, there's a lot of speculators out there, and we're going to temporarily take the entire system off the gold standard. What people didn't see at that point was everything behind the scenes, all the pieces being moved, everything being set up. And of course, that was the beginning of the system. So a lot of people said, it's not bad. Look, my house just doubled in price. My wage has gone up. I'm getting 17, 18% on my CDs. This is fantastic. Now, there were a lot of people during this period of time that couldn't find jobs. There was just no jobs to be found. It was actually awful for many people. But this was the beginning of the system, and as the system came online, people thought, wow, this isn't bad. Things are improving. Interest rates now are coming down as we hit into the 80s because everything was starting to settle out. Now, during the 80s, the 90s, during this period of time, yes, we had our ups and downs. And this was done on purpose because the central banks, this is what they do. Now, here we are at the end of the system. People are so relaxed now. People are so comfortable in this economy, they don't even understand what is coming. I mean, they're talking about the stock market. They're talking about their investments, and they're talking about how can I make more money. When you look at the bigger picture, when you look at what is actually going on in Syria, with Russia, with China, with India, with the IMF, with the dollar, with the yuan, with the ruble, with the sale of oil not being sold using the dollar. You have to take all of this into account to understand what is happening in the economy. It's not just that, oh, look, the unemployment numbers are bad, and oh, look, the stock market's going up. Oh, look, retail is bad. Yes, these are all different signs of what is going on. You need to understand the root of this entire destruction of the dollar. Because once this takes hold, it's going to spread, and people are not going to understand what is really happening. Just like people didn't understand in the 70s what was happening, where we were coming off the gold standard and they're saying there was gas shortages when there really wasn't. They didn't understand we were going onto a new system. Remember, we didn't have much debt back then. Remember, they were just starting the printing presses. Yes, they were printing a lot of currency during the Vietnam War, but it really went into overdrive once we came off the gold standard. The dollar was really devalued at that point in time. They had to raise interest rates. Here we are at the end, and we're heading into an area where people are not going to really understand what is happening, because it's all starting out in the Middle East with the petrodollar. And that's going to hit and disintegrate further and further. And eventually, when it comes back here to the U.S., and many countries are not using the dollar any longer because they don't need the dollar. And why don't they need the dollar? Because these countries are going to be selling the oil using other currencies. Remember, the system was set up on using the dollar to purchase natural resources like oil. When this discontinues, and it is being discontinued right now, and what happens is it's very slow. We've been tracking this. Think about it when we first started doing this. Those people have been listening to for a very long time. Remember when we said, oh, look, China stopped using the dollar. Russia stopped using the dollar. Russia and China, now they're having trade without the dollar. Iran decided, you know what, we're not going to use the dollar. Saudi now is in negotiations with China and Russia to trade their oil not using the dollar. Qatar is now going to sell their natural gas not using the dollar, and the rest of the Gulf nations are going to join in on this because they understand that this system is coming to an end. So when we look at what is happening within the economy, you need to understand the bigger picture. It's not just one thing. And we're seeing many things happen all at once. For instance, the LIBOR, and we know this is one gigantic manipulation. We know banks were caught manipulating the LIBOR interest rate. Well, they're going to discontinue this. They're going to phase it out by 2021. Now, of course, the bankers already have a new system in place. Now, do you think it's going to be any better than LIBOR? No, they're going to be doing the same manipulation. And this new system is the Alternative Reference Rate Committee. Now, it sounds fantastic. And it's made up of a group of U.S. banks. And this is all part of the central banker transition. This is what they're doing right now. This is why they're talking about having a payment system which is in real time. The IMF is looking to move their offices to China. The Silk Road, the Belt and Road system, will be coming online in all these emerging markets. Well, they're going to be becoming very prosperous by using this trade system. And we can see already that things are already in motion. And we know that Trump, and I don't want anyone to think that, well, Trump is just going to save us from all of this. That's not what we're talking about. His job is to bring us through this transition. Now, is it going very well? Not really. As you can see, those in government, they don't want to remove anything that's in place right now. They become very, very wealthy on this system. This is why when he first started out, he wanted to bring back manufacturing, bring back jobs, because he understood that this needs to come back here to the United States. This is why he's telling everyone to buy American, because what is going to happen later on, as we move through this transition, and the dollars come back to the United States, how much do you think imports are going to be? Do you think once we stop becoming the reserve currency of the world, you don't think the dollar is going to be devalued? 30, 40, 50%, probably a new currency will be issued, because we're probably going to have a domestic dollar, or whatever they're going to call it. Could be electronic currency. It's going to be devalued. And once it's devalued, the imports are going to become very expensive. So what do we have to do? We have to manufacture at home. We have to purchase American. Now, this is going to be very difficult because a lot of the products, the components inside the products, well, they have foreign components, which will make it very difficult to keep the prices down. Like, let's take a car, for instance. I mean, you might have a car with tires that come from Japan. You might have other components in the engine, the electronics, and things like that that are made in Mexico and many other places. And they are all being imported in here and put together here, but everything is not being produced here. So when this hits, it's going to be many different things happening at once. And he's not trying to save everything. He can't put all these policies into place. It's completely impossible. He is a master of default. He is a master of bankruptcy. He understands what to do with it. Now, is Congress going to let him do this? Are the powers that be going to let him do this? No. Look how difficult it is to do what he wants to do. It's quite impossible. The system, well, it's going to have to come down one way or another. And we can see already that this is exactly what's happening because the rest of the world is moving on. And once the value of the dollar decreases by 30, 40, 50, 60%, well, this country, which has no manufacturing, very little bit of manufacturing, very little bit of exporting, we import a lot into the country, well, this is going to be a difficult transition period. Now, we know that Trump is trying to make trade deals with other countries. Now, the central bankers don't like this. Remember, he tried to make he's out there telegraphing that he's making a trade deal with the UK, and already the European Union Trade Commissioner has warned Britain the bloc can thwart any potential trade deal with the United States. And Karel de Gucht, who's the EU Trade Minister, he's out there saying, listen, Brussels is not going to allow Theresa May to sign any global trade agreement with the UK because they need to maintain access to the bloc's single market. And right now they're saying, yeah, this is not going to happen. They're blocking everything that has to be done. Now remember, those in government who make a lot of money off of the central bank, those who are pushing the agenda, they don't want their system to change. It's not necessarily the central bankers, because they don't care what country they're with, as long as they have control of the monetary system where they're able to create the currency. But those people who benefit from it, those who are in line with the central bank, they don't want their way of life changing because they make a lot of money. And we can see there's different factions here. Now, the central bankers, they don't care. They'll basically set up shop in China. They'll set up shop in Russia. They'll set up shop anywhere else. It makes no difference to them because they have no allegiance whatsoever. And we can see right now that they want to maintain control of the entire system. Now, very interestingly, the Securities and Exchange Commission, they issued a press release cautioning market participants that offer initial coin offerings. Now, these are the ICOs. This is the cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Litecoin, and things like that. And they are saying that, listen, this new system, the cryptocurrency system, it is now subject to security laws. So this report confirms that issuers of distributed ledger or blockchain technology-based securities must register offers and sales of such securities unless a valid exemption applies. Those participating in unregistered offerings also may be liable for violations of the security laws. So already we see they're trying to regulate the crypto market. So what does this mean for those people who are investing in these altcoins? Well, it means your personal right to participate in free markets of ICOs was basically just shut down by the Security Exchange. Secondly, it convenes the several dozen blockchain projects that raise capital through the blockchain will probably move out of the U.S. because of the SEC ruling on compliance with federal securities. And we can see that they'll outsource jobs overseas because they don't want to be involved with the SEC regulations. So already we can see they're trying to maintain control of the system. And we know the central banks want to maintain control over the blockchain. They want full control of this system. And what we're seeing is that as all this is taking place, as the petrodollar is being dismantled and countries are not using the dollar, we're going to see, as we've been seeing, the economy fall apart. And it's going to accelerate as time goes on, because all the stimulus and everything that they've done, where they shoved inflation into the market, they shoved inflation into the housing market, they shoved inflation out overseas to keep the system alive. They kept the interest rates very, very low because this is the end of the system. We're starting to see that everything is basically falling apart in the country. We're seeing it with retail. We're seeing it with housing. We're seeing it with everything that we look at. I mean, think about this for a second. The housing market, the people that own houses right now, is back down to the 1960s level. Now, at one point, and that is, the level is around 63.7%. That is lower than the 80s. That is lower than the 90s. That is lower from 2000 to 2008. I mean, that's how bad. So who is buying houses right now? If we have home ownership at its lowest point that we've ever seen since the 60s, well, we know who's buying them. The investment companies, the hedge funds, and those type of individuals, where they're purchasing many, many homes, keeping them off the market and renting them if they can. Now, the millennials, those 35 and younger, they can't purchase homes right now. It's very, very difficult. They can't find great jobs. They can't save the money. Wages are decreasing, and they are now renting or living with their parents. And we can see living with their parents is at an all-time high. About 31% or so, they're living with their parents, ages 18 to 34. So this is what it looks like when a system breaks down. It looks just like this. And this is what you've been looking at all this time. When people say, no, this is going to pass, don't worry, better jobs are going to come, where are they coming from? Where's manufacturing coming from? It's not. It's not coming to the U.S. until the U.S. goes through this very difficult period. And even then, it's going to take years to bring everything back. It took years to send it overseas. So what do they have to do to bring it all back? They have to change regulations. They have to make it attractive for corporations to come back. They're going to have to lower taxes, because think about, what did other countries do to attract these businesses out there? Hardly any regulations, lower taxes, and benefits for corporations to make it worthwhile to move everything back to here. And this has to happen. Without this happening, the U.S. is pretty much finished. Even when the system goes down, there's nothing here. We can't be a consumer-based country. It's not going to work. We're not going to be the reserve currency anymore, because we can see already countries are moving away from the dollar. I mean, is it going to happen tomorrow? Well, it's been happening. Every couple of months, we see another country doing business bypassing the dollar. We see countries already to do business bypassing the dollar. When the Silk Road, the Belt and Road system, is operational, do you think all these countries are going to be doing business with the dollar? Or do you think they'll be using the ruble? Or do you think they'll be using the yuan? They're not going to be using the dollar. And the countries that sell oil, well, guess what? They're not going to be using the dollar. This is what the empire, the deep state, wanted when they went into each one of these countries in the Middle East, because they decided that they didn't want to use the dollar anymore. It wasn't because of weapons of mass destruction. It wasn't because of whatever they told you on the corporate media. It was because they were trying to sell the oil, not using the dollar. Syria, they wanted Syria because they wanted a pipeline going through Syria to supply Europe. This is not happening. The pipeline is coming from Iran into Iraq, going into Syria, going into Europe. There's a pipeline coming from Russia, going into Turkey, then into Europe. The United States is being left out of this. The deep state, with their regime change and their empire building, it's all falling apart. Now it's time to start rebuilding what's here. And if we don't rebuild, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. So I'm not saying Trump is a savior. I'm not saying he's going to save America. What he's going to do, he's going to prepare for this transition the best he can. There are going to be those who are going to fight him all the way. Because you know what it's like when you're trying to change something. If you worked in a corporation and you try to push your changes, people don't like to cooperate. Especially when they think everything's great. Especially when they're making a lot of money. They don't see the writing on the wall. Just like with, let's say, Obamacare, for instance. Don't you think the argument, the negotiation between Democrats and Republicans would be very different if they didn't have their health insurance and they were going back and forth with the negotiations because they had to accept Obamacare and it was mandatory for them to accept any other health insurance, even Obamacare? Do you think the whole conversation would be completely different? Do you think the arguments would be different? Yeah, they would be. Because you know why? Because they're involved. They're not involved now. They're keeping their own health insurance. They don't care about anything else. When they accept something, that's when they're involved. Right now, our Congress, our entire government is not connected to the people. They're so far removed, it's ridiculous. That's why they keep spending. That's why they don't care. That's why they're doing everything for their lobbies. Remember, they're salespeople. They get paid to push certain bills. Take that away and make them take everything that they're pushing for, you will see something completely different. So they're not preparing for a collapse of the system. They're not even looking at that because they want their system to stay. They don't want it to disappear. They have a good thing going. The rest of the country, it's getting worse and worse and worse. Yes, they're hiding it with the stock market, but the everyday person is feeling it. And there's another person that's brought onto it every single day. And then they start to realize it. And I hate to say this, but people don't realize how bad it is until you try to sell your home in an area where there's no one coming to look at your home. When you lose your job and you say, well, wait a minute, why can't I find a job? That's when people wake up. Otherwise, people are just asleep. So when this hits, there's going to be a lot of people that are not prepared for this. This is why I've been saying, get prepared for what is about to happen. And what's going to happen is we're going to go through this transition period where things are going to be very, very ugly. It's not going to be easy. Think about Venezuela, think about Argentina, think about Greece, Cyprus, think about Russia when they went through the collapse. Actually, I should say the Soviet Union when they went through the collapse. Once we are no longer the reserve currency, our way of life is going to change. A lot of people are not going to accept this. A lot of people are not going to understand this. And there's going to be a lot of chaos during this period. People are going to be very worried. And this is why, to ensure your wealth, gold and silver will do this. Because when the dollar is going to lose value, and I'm not talking about the gold and silver paper market. I'm talking about physical gold. I don't sell gold. I don't sell silver. I don't sell anything, actually. That, over the thousands and thousands of years, that has basically maintained people's wealth over time. Even if we go on to an electronic currency, gold and silver will help because you will have the wealth. Think about it. If you have gold or silver and now a cryptocurrency or whatever currency they're going to use, you can use the gold and silver and they're going to give you whatever the dollar amount or whatever the currency amount is at that time. And it's not going to be suppressed. It's not going to be manipulated. It's going to hit whatever it's going to be at that time. And those people who don't have it and they try to change in their old currency, well, they might get 10 cents on the dollar compared to someone who has silver or gold. And this is why it is so important. This is why I've been pushing this message, because it is taking the bankers, the central bankers, this long to create this illusion, and they're trying to figure a way out of this. How do we do it? Well, we raise rates, we collapse the economy. Who do we blame? And we can see already the Fed right now, they're saying, listen, if the government, and remember, they don't care about the government, if they can't decide, what they're going to do with the debt ceiling, if they can't raise it or there's complications, we're just not going to unwind our $4.5 trillion balance sheet. We're going to have to blame it on the U.S. because they cannot make a decision. And I think this is going to be the central bankers out, and they're going to blame it on the U.S. government. They'll blame it on Trump. They'll blame it on Congress. They don't really care. And we can see already, they're already out there telegraphing they're out. Remember, they said they're going to raise rates. We're going to keep rates steady. We're going to unwind our balance sheet. They're flip-flopping all over the place because they're stuck right now. And they want someone to blame. And this is what they've been preparing for, and this is what they've been doing. So get prepared, get ready, because remember, the system can come down at any moment. They're not going to flash a red sign saying system coming down, the stock market's coming down, the economy just imploded. It's just going to happen one day. You're going to wake up, or it's going to be in the afternoon, it's going to be on a Friday, and everything's just going to come to an end. You'll hear it on the news. They'll tell you everything is okay.